You ready? Okay. I'm here today speaking with Vladimir Prebilič, Slovenian MEP from the Greens EFA group. We're talking today about Turkey's relation with the EU and the state of human rights and democracy in Turkey. So first, thank you for joining us, and would you mind explaining a little bit about your interest and involvement in the topic?
Well, there is a certain track record when we talk about Türkiye and European associations. I don't know how familiar you are. I was also a member of the local and regional authorities within the Council of Europe for years, over 10 years. And this was the first time when I met also representatives, mayors from Türkiye, who were also member of this association there. And it was concerning already then, at that time, this was like 14 years ago, the situation in Türkiye went from bad to worse, to be really honest with you, especially regarding democratic values, regarding freedom of speech, freedom of association, and of course not to be forgotten the, let's say, scrutiny or let's say rights and privileges of local and regional self-government in Türkiye. So this was the time when we started to follow what is happening. We made also few field trips or fact-finding missions to Türkiye, also to Istanbul and Ankara, also to meet with the Association of Turkish Municipalities and talk to the interlocutors from local and regional representatives. And it was really unpleasant to hear the development, especially when we talk about dismissals of mayors, imprisonment of mayors, and appointment of trustees. So this was something that we were not happy about. And based on that, we also prepared a special report that was also presented within Council of Europe. I was a rapporteur on that. And unfortunately, although we were quite clear what should be changed regarding local and regional self-government in Türkiye, not much was happening. So we were quite, I would say, depressed from this perspective. And before I went, this was last year in 2024, because when I was elected to the parliament, I had to resign from my previous position in the Council of Europe. And when this happened, my legacy was to, let's say, stimulate the authorities in Türkiye to sign a special, let's say, contract with Council of Europe that certain things will implement in that regards. But unfortunately, this was not done before I went, so I wouldn't know today where this agreement is. But all this knowledge and background understanding of Türkiye came now to European Parliament, and this is also one of the reasons why I'm really following closely what is happening today.
I see, thank you. So you mentioned things have gone from bad to worse in Turkey's case. What specifically would you see as the major threats to democracy and human rights that are going on today?
Well, it would be quite a long list, unfortunately, But, just to focus maybe on four really important points. Well, the first one is that we can see more and more concentration of power, political and any kind of a power, in one person. This is always really bad when we talk about democracy. The next issue that, of course, is always being on the table is freedom of media and reporting. That's in any democracy, media is there to guard democracy. This is not being, let's say, happening within system and living in Türkiye. So I think this is a very important issue. A lot of journalists are threatened, are let's say, censored in any way. So it's really, really depressing. Of course, according to that fact, people may not have all the information that is needed if you wanted to go on the elections and, of course, express your will and expectation. Also, when it comes to the elections, since I was, let's say, in position to oversee the elections, local elections in Türkiye, it could be seen that there is a big turnover. This is good. People are really going to vote and express their attitude. However, I could see a certain fatigue of population, because whenever they vote for a certain, let's say, party or even person, this may not be then their will at the end of the day, because the mayors who were elected, if not being in, let's say, in expectations of the central government, they could also be deposed from the positions. And this is really depressing when we talk about democratic values. And finally, legal framework is being bent to the needs of the central government. So this is really not fair, and it's far away from democracy. But list could be also longer. So my observation is that over, let's say, 10, 15 years that I was able to follow this kind of development, as I said in the start of our conversation, I think the things are just not going the right way. So we are backsliding when we talk about democracy, and this is really unfortunate. Okay,
I see. And how do you think that the European Union can respond to this backsliding in Turkey?
Well, we would like to have more to say, you know. The problem is that there is always in the air what could we do more and how far we can go. You know, to be honest with you, the Parliament was always quite clear on the standpoints. As you would also follow our resolutions that we are proposing here in European Parliament, we are really straightforward when it comes to the, let's say, backsliding in democracy. However, we all know that in foreign policy, the power is basically entrusted into a commission to a certain level, but moreover, to the Council. So this is the body where the governments are sitting of the member countries of the European Parliament, of the European Union, sorry. So we do not have the leverage, I would say. However, we do press on both institutions, either Commission on one side or the Council on the other side. So we are clear on that. But there is also a development that I think could be quite dangerous one, and this is within the Parliament. We have right-winger parties who are basically advocating for cutting the ties with Turkey. So, to be really blunt and straightforward, their understanding is, well, if they don't want to do something about that, just, you know, forget about them. Let's move on without Turkey. I think this is a dangerous way to go. Why? Because I think that this is exactly what the national government in Turkey is expecting to happen. So, if this would be the case, then they would do, in quotation mark, business as usual. But on the other side, the population of Turkey, who is pro-European Union, who is fighting for democracy there, will be also abandoned. And I think this will be the wrong move into the wrong way.
Okay, so elaborating on that then, given the diversity of political views that are represented in the European Parliament now, how difficult is it to create a consensus and form a unified European parliamentary response to external issues such as democracy in Turkey?
Oh, it's quite, I would say, an effort, to be honest with you. So there are, like, you know, let's say my political group, the Greens, we do not have so much of questions because we understand quite, you know, straightforward what democracy is, what we stand for, which are the values of democracy. But, you know, there are certain political parties who are gaining from this ideology clashes approach, like far-right parties. Also, EPP could be much more, you know, straight to the point when we talk about democracy, but they don't have the will, I would say, to go so far. So it's difficult to create a consensus, because you would know that when we talk about resolutions, if you wanted to push resolution to the Parliament, you would have to have majority. So there is a lot of debate. There is a long process of coordination if you wanted to have a unified standpoint of the Parliament on one side. But on the other side, I think it's really important to understand and may this be a message to the people in Turkey. You know, we are also elected persons, so there is a lot of constituency behind us. Basically, every MEP here sitting in the Parliament represents roughly 800,000 votes. So we are also home. We go home to national countries. We talk back home to our national governments, and moreover, we talk to our constituency what is happening there. So, you know, this is something that we can do, you know, spreading the news, even unpleasant ones, but raising the awareness among constituency across European countries. So I know this may have a long way to go, but at the end of the day, this may create a certain movement that more power will be exercised to the government sitting in Ankara. And to be really straightforward with the additional issue, we have to stop playing the game. You know, there is, I would say, the name of the game today between Turkey on one side and European Union is what can we get for something, you know, on both sides. And to be really, well, you know, honest, I think this is the wrong way to go. Why? Because there is an ongoing debate, you know, can Turkey give us something and maybe we can repay in the way to look the other way. This is really wrong attitude. We can't or should not continue with this kind of policy, because this kind of attitude does not bring any welfare or any good for the development of democracy in Turkey.
Okay, so I think personally as a an MEP, I would say you're in a unique position in the sense that the Parliament represents directly European citizens rather than most other institutions in the EU which represent European governments. And from my perspective, I would say that this makes you quite uniquely qualified to speak out and to show solidarity with Turkish citizens who are also protesting their government. And yet, as you mentioned previously, the Parliament itself plays a comparatively small role in creating the EU's overall foreign policy. So what would you say have you found to be the most effective ways of working within those institutional limitations to still show support for Turkish citizens?
Well, we should continue with the work when we talk about the resolution that we pass here in the Parliament, because every resolution that we pass has certain echo also within the member countries. So we should continue with this approach. But what I would like really to change, this is my, let's say, intimate wish, if you want, is to create, let's say, an ad hoc body that would be more in contact with what is happening in Turkey. There is a certain committee, but this committee is not acting as I would expect them to act. So we would need something that will be much more engaged. And what I really miss is visiting Turkey also, visiting also people who are in prison today, like Ekrem İmamoğlu, for quite some time now. So I think we should be more present also on the ground, not only from the perspective of European Parliament, because this can be too far to understand also the citizens from the side of citizens of Turkey. So we really have to be much more engaged, much more vocal, and also present on the ground. And this is something that I would really like to come up with. I already talked to a certain person from the S&D group who is a reporter on Turkey, and he was also sitting before with me in the Council of Europe. Maybe we can persuade the Parliament, to be much more vocal, and with the help of this kind of ad hoc commission, I think we could be much more contributing to possibility or possible development of democracy also in Turkey. I see. Is there any precedent for those sorts of techniques? There are. Right now we talk about the same issues about Serbia. I don't know how do you follow Serbia case? I was there also promoting this idea, and the parliament authorities are now thinking about this. So, comprising ad hoc committee from every political group of one representative, and this then be really basically daily engaged into development in a certain case, because, as I said, this development is not going the right way, and we have to be much more engaged as we are today. So, Turkey, Serbia, and some other countries like Georgia and so on, these countries are under big pressure when we talk about democratic development, and having normal committees, standing committees for these countries cannot deliver the expectations, nor on the side of the parliament, and let alone on the side of the people of before mentioned countries.
Okay. I don't want to go too deep into the Western Balkans, but typically the Western Balkans and the case of Turkey are discussed quite separately within EU circles, but of course you have quite a bit of experience with both. Would you say there are similarities there, that they should be discussed kind of more as one region, or is it better to, treat them separately?
Well, it's difficult to put them into one box because, Turkey is still a country who is far away to be a possible member country of the European Union. So the attitude is really different. And the development in Western Balkans today is that countries being there should be, or we all work on, to be our next member countries of the European Union. Also, the process is running, the chapters are open, negotiations are underway. So it's another dimension, of let's say, relationships. However, there is also something that has to be mentioned, and this is so-called geopolitics. So whenever we talk about this attitude or this approach, then of course Turkey plays very important role. So this role is much more, from my perspective, as somebody who is teaching geopolitics for 25 years at the University of Ljubljana. So this importance of Turkey is fast bigger than it is when we talk about the Western Balkans. So from this perspective, I may understand to a certain degree also the governments within member countries of the European Union, that they would like to have a certain relationship with Turkey, also in the way not to be so pressing on these democratic standards that we were talking before. However, again, I think that too far to go would be also a backfire also for the European Union as a whole. So, to be honest, I would expect also Commission and member countries to apply a certain level of conditionality. So whenever we have this kind of, let's say, debate, even a certain sums of money being allocated also for Turkey from the European side, let's say case of migrations, let's also put on top also the question of democratic backsliding in Turkey. So these things should be on the same page, not like we will help you in that way and we will just turn the blind eye on the other one. So this is the wrong approach, I would say, from the perspective of the European Union. So certain conditionality should be on table when we talk about this democratic development.
Okay.
Not happening.
Of course. Backsliding more.
Yeah, exactly.
So you've been quite clear in your statements, both now and previously, condemning the Turkish government for failing to live up to its responsibilities as both an EU candidate state and also a member of the Council of Europe. You've hinted about your position at this, but I can ask you directly, would you say it's better for these organizations to loosen ties with Turkey in accordance of the government's consistent divergence with European actions and values, or would you say it's better to maintain those ties to try to maintain international pressure to course correct?
Well, it's a very good question, and I already tried to tackle that before. But, there is a very famous sentence from the former Secretary General of NATO when he was asked, whether or not NATO should enlarge, and he said openly, it's better to have them in the tent pissing out, not to have them out pissing in the tent. But why I'm saying that is because, sorry for the rough language,
That's
but
all right.
This was the citation. But nevertheless, what I'm trying to explain is, of course, it would be easier from the European perspective to leave this story or this chapter behind and leave Turkey as it is. But this, I think, will be the wrong move. Why? Because, again, the authorities are expecting that to happen to a certain way. Because if this will happen, then they would have an open market. They can do basically whatever they want, and there will be no one from European perspective even asking the questions, guys. Really, do you want to go that way? So I think the cutting the ties is not a solution, just the opposite. I think more involvement may be the solution, and more open support for those who are on the right side of the history. And these are the NGOs, these are many political parties and leaders who stand and who were brave enough, to put them in the front lines for democratic values. They should be more supported. So I would be on the standpoint that cutting the ties would not help and would just push Turkey even far away from European continent, but also from the perspective of let's say future development of democracy.
Okay, thank you. So the Turkish government, as you well know, has failed to implement a lot of the ECHR rulings, particularly, for example, in recent years, Yalçınkaya versus Turkey. What would you say the EU can do and the European Parliament perhaps can do in order to help the Turkish government properly implement and follow through with the ECHR's judgments?
Yes. So, to be really clear on that, the rulings that you have mentioned, these are the most important rulings, basically. Why? Because the Human Rights Court just over the water, is the highest court that we have in Europe, and those standards are being recognized by all member countries. So that means that we all agree that these standards should be implemented. Not implementing them would mean that they are really not respecting whatever they signed for. So this is really, really bad. And when it comes to these particular cases you mentioned before, I think that this will be a very good starting point of conditionality. So I think that the European Union should have a certain leverage and quite clearer approach when it comes to these questions, in the way to say, really, this is the so-called red line. So crossing it should have certain implications, should have certain consequences also for the government in Turkey. So I think, not executing the judgments or things that were said by the court is something that we should be really careful about, and should not just go away or being forgotten. So this is not the right attitude, is not also the right understanding of the rule of law that we basically stand for and fight for.
All right. Moving quickly towards the Kurdish question, the recent ceasefire with the PKK could be a pivotal turning point in Turkish politics and history generally. But that, of course, depends on how things play out in the next few years. So what would you say the political and legal steps should be, or which should be prioritized within Turkey to ensure that this ceasefire lasts and that the Kurdish issue is resolved peacefully and for the benefit of all parties involved?
No, I need to first congratulate for this kind of the attitude or this kind of development, especially regarding the Kurdish side. Moving from securitization of this question to the political dimension of this question is something that everybody, basically, globally speaking, should be really proud of, because this is the right way to go. And there are so many cases across the world that should look after this case in Turkey. So I think this is a really good move and should be encouraged by all means. Hopefully the national government would respect this kind of, let's say, sacrifice from the side of the Kurdish side, and that next step will follow. And the next step that I see should follow is to reinstallment of the Kurdish mayors who were rightfully elected, stopping the appointments of trustees, and stopping direct involvement of national government into the local self-government that choose by the election, so by the freedom of votes, their representatives. So this is now the side of the national government to be smart enough, to be, I would say, honest enough, because I understand this was achieved over the long debate, over the long exchange of views. So if they are really honest and truly wanted to have a new development in Turkey, a positive one, now they have opportunity on the table. So I think that the Kurdish side did what they can do, and now the president and the AK Party and whoever is not today running the show in Turkey is on the move to follow with the next steps. Let's see what will be the development. I hope for the best. Okay,
so you sound a little bit more cautiously optimistic then on this issue.
I am, because as I said, I'm following for 15 years the latest development, and there were many promises given. Unfortunately, a lot of them were broken.
Okay, all right. I think last question then. As we mentioned before about the Parliament's role in foreign policy, what are your views on that? Do you think that the Parliament should play a larger role in creating a European foreign policy?
Indeed, I believe this should be that case. However, I am really realistic when we talk about involvement of the European Parliament into the foreign politics, because there is a legal framework that we have in the European Union. Of course, it is difficult to bend these rules to the level of more engagement of the Parliament. But I think this is now also the point that we should maybe talk between us, also within the institutions. So when we talk about the Commission, Council and the Parliament, maybe there is now the time that a certain exchange should follow in the way to have much more authorities also to the Parliament. However, I know this is going to be difficult because, the member countries of the European Union are really not prone attitude to give the powers from their hands. But the global development that we now have, and many challenges like wars and so on, and the trade wars on the horizon, we would need more Europe, not less Europe. More Europe would mean that the democratically elected representatives should have more to say in the future development of the European Union.
Okay, so you're hoping to close the democratic deficit a little bit.
Exactly. We have to talk about democratic deficit because today, as we all know, unfortunately, a lot of people who are leading the European Union are basically even not elected.
Which, actually, if that does work out in terms of closing that deficit, that might also be kind of a role model for Turkey, for example.
It would be a very good one, definitely, not only for Turkey, maybe also for other countries across the world that are really centralistic oriented. Even maybe for China, I don't know. So maybe let's talk about that more. But as I said, more democracy normally means more freedom and means also more development.
Okay. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you very much for having me.
Of course.
Sure.